What's up? Welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of Shogun, the historical drama miniseries out now in full on FX and Hulu. Shogun has got a lot of plaudits to this point, also surprising rating hits for FX, getting over 9 million viewers for its premiere in its first week. Very justly earned as well, because Shogun has really got critical acclaim, commercial acclaim across the board. It's really been the show of 2024 thus far. We're going to talk about the entire run of the series, all 10 episodes. Going to go through each episode, my general thoughts. I have a lot to say. I really love the show, and I think this is something to celebrate. FX's Shogun is a television masterpiece, easily the best show of 2024 thus far, but also I'm confident in saying will go down as one of the best shows of the 2020s. It's really one of the most gripping TV series I've ever watched, and it accomplishes that by just absolutely impeccable character development. And I'm not just talking about the main characters on the show. Of course, Hiroyuki Sanada's Toranaga, you know what you're going to get from Sanada. Tadanobu Asano as Yabushige, very charismatic, great stuff there. Cosmo Jarvis kind of comes out of nowhere as the Anjin, John Blackthorne, he's great. But the true highlight, of course, is Anna Sawai as Lady Mariko. This was a absolute knockout of her performance. What makes Shogun so great is it's not just those lead characters that are so good. Think of characters like Buntaro, or Toranaga's son, or Lady Fuji. It really rewards your investment because we continue to learn more and more about these characters. It's so rich, so intricately drawn. And on top of that, amazing historical accuracy and period detail. It's really everything you want in a TV show. I mean, there's really nothing bad to say about it. Coming into this show, Shogun, the advanced press got a lot of plaudits for being compared to Game of Thrones in a loving way, where the palace intrigue, the plotting, and the strength of the screenwriting, all of that together really was getting people's attention. I think that's all accurate. But what's interesting about Shogun is just how satisfying the show feels, despite not being littered with like big blockbuster, Game of Thrones season 6 style set pieces. It doesn't have that. Even in this finale, of course, spoilers for all of Shogun, don't know why you're watching if you didn't know that coming in, but with the finale, right, we don't get like that big final battle. We don't get Toranaga versus Ishido. It's alluded to via Toranaga's words to Yabushige, but it's a character show. And by giving you such a subdued finale, I was really kind of knocked out by it. And I think, Justin Marks, Rachel Kondo, staff writer Emily Yoshida, this whole creative team, they spent a lot of time on Shogun. This was in post-production for a long time. They even had to jumpstart production to maintain the option rights to this show. It took a long time to bring this version of Shogun to the screen. Of course, it was a miniseries in the 80s based off the James Clavell novel. We know that. But the time invested in telling this story clearly shows, because there was such intricate planning with how they wanted to, create this narrative. And there's just payoff after payoff with characters, even if it's not flashy action, flashy plot progression that is, achieving that payoff. And I mean, it's a standout series to me. And I think it's probably going to run away with the Emmy for limited series. That much is very obvious, especially with FX behind it. But I would certainly be pulling for Anna Sawai to win supporting actress in a limited series. Frankly, Shogun's strong enough to compete against all the drama shows in the big drama category, but I think because it's a clear limited series, it can kind of take those easy dubs and just, run away and run it up with the limited series categories. But yeah, I mean, I was just really knocked out by this show. I think week to week, and talk about a show that benefits from the week to week drop. My God, it's so thankful that it wasn't a binge drop, because just to sit in this world, of course, turn of 1600, feudal Japan, just to spend time with these characters and go on this journey. I think the time spent really shows, and you get rewarded for all the time investment and planning the creative team put into it. So let's just kind of jump into the series itself, because I think there's just so many awesome moments. But again, let's back up to the cast. Hiroyuki Sanada as Toranaga, he's great the whole time. He's very regal, very serene. I think one thing that's really key about Shogun's storytelling, and maybe it's something you could butt up against a little bit, is that us as the viewer have to kind of just buy into Toranaga kind of being like an all-seeing or all-knowing mastermind type character. That's how he's portrayed to us. That's how he's kind of portrayed to the characters around him, where we don't really know what he's thinking or what he's up to. But I think the show, rewards you for having that faith and how it goes. I think the finale as well, in Toranaga's final words to Yabushige, where Yabushige asks him or says to him if he wanted to be shogun all along, was that his plan? And, we don't even know at the end. We don't really know where that's going to settle. And yet, I never really felt like he was this, like, magical character or anything. I thought everything he achieved was done very well. And Sanada, obviously, a paragon of Japanese filmmaking, as people know, really great throughout the show. And Tanobu Osano, who I had been quite familiar with as well, because he has done a lot of Hollywood stuff like Sanada, man, he deserves a lot of credit for how he portrayed Yabushige. Yabushige is told to us as the viewer as a snake very early on. We know he's an untrustworthy, flip-flopping scumbag, right? We watch him boil alive one of Blackthorn's mates, in the first episode, for crying out loud, right? We know he's a weirdo, and he, is not loyal. And yet, because Asano has so much just raw charisma playing this character who, like, feels between a rock and a hard place at times and is trying to do what's best for himself, but in the process has no spine at all, I think he deserves a lot of credit, because right up until the end, right up until the penultimate episode, where he finally does something truly unforgivable, like, you're kind of, like, rocking with the dude still. And I think Asano deserves a lot of credit for that. Cosmo Jarvis as John Blackthorne, the Anjin. Man, I think it takes a lot to, like, be the successful, white character in a show set in Japan. We've literally just talked about this with Tokyo Vice on Max, when you had Ansel Elgort and Rachel Keller playing white expats in 1990s Japan. It's very similar here. Like, a lot's asked of you, and I think Jarvis, much like Elgort and Keller, learned to speak Japanese for this show. Convincing. Not an easy thing to do, obviously, but also I think Jarvis's just voice, like his demeanor, his the drawl to how he speaks as the Anjin, man, it's quite memorable to me. Like, it's he's not like the star of the show in the traditional sense, because he's a character who's very much along for the ride. He's not a conventionally heroic person. He's the Anjin. He is the pilot. He is the ship seaman, right? He's not this cunning warrior. He doesn't become amazing swinging a katana sword by the end of Shogun. This is not The Last Samurai, right? That's not who he is. So I think Jarvis has to do a lot as Blackthorne, especially in the back half of Shogun, where the Blackthorne character is feeling kind of largely out of place and, again, frustratingly powerless, as he doesn't really know what he can do. And I thought Jarvis really throughout the show, but especially in the back half when I think a lot more was asked of him, really delivered. And then, of course, as I said before, Anna Sawai, just the absolute coming out party for Shogun. I mean, I was a fan of her in Pachinko. That was a supporting role. Not much was asked of her in Monarch Legacy of Monsters, but I enjoyed her. Of course, she kind of came out of nowhere to many of us in Fast and Furious 9, lest we forget. But this show, I mean, my God, again, it speaks to, I think, how the narrative is planned with Shogun, because the Lady Mariko character has so much power and narrative importance while still being in a story where women are largely at the behest of men, in the society we're watching. And I think Anna Sawai, her acting talent is so evident in Shogun, just what she can communicate with her face, what she can communicate with her silence, with her glances, her mannerisms, her lack of reaction at times. You kind of saw the whole gamut across the season, and I thought it really knocks you out. Obviously, also the chemistry between the Anjin and Lady Mariko when they get close to each other romantically, very convincing, I must say. I thought the chemistry was certainly there. But really, more than anything else, Sawai is able to communicate Lady Mariko's really deep pain, deep dread as a character, where as we learn more about her and her genuine, like, consistent unhappiness with her life. Once we learn what happened to her father, learn the realities of her marriage to Buntaro and her real genuine belief in being kind of in a life of service to Toranaga, because that's like the only thing that really gives her any kind of fulfillment. And when you're in the penultimate episode and you realize Lady Mariko will commit seppuku after being refused exit from Osaka Castle by Ishido, you believe it because you know how much that really means to her. And, I think there's some great scenes with her in the church sprinkled throughout earlier parts of the season. And then, of course, when she sacrifices herself intentionally, she didn't necessarily have to do that, but when she puts herself in front of the about to explode bomb, the explosives in front of the locked door at the end of the penultimate episode, you know why. You understand. Again, I think it's all Anna Sawai. Like, she just really, really knocked it out of the park. Like, just an amazing performance, completely screen stealing the entire time she's on the screen. And as I said before, some of the supporting characters, I think they get their moments. They get their stuff's colored in for them, fulfilled. There is character development across the cast list. Someone like Buntaro, right? Mariko's husband, who she does not love, right? Who is literally abusing her in the context of their marriage. You learn more about him and what he cares about, and not that necessarily you like him, but like more is colored in, right? I would say the same for Toranaga's son, Nakakato, who obviously meets a poor end throughout this later in the series, but like you clearly understand what kind of character he is and what Toranaga thinks of his eldest son. Yabushige's nephew, his like adoptive son, someone who is a very small character early on and really just kind of buddies with Toranaga's son. He becomes quite interesting as he kind of gets his own identity throughout the show and starts to move apart from how Yabushige has been moving, even though he's kind of been in service to him, right? Um, all the consorts, I thought, were surprisingly quite deep as far as characters go. The stuff with the church, I think the lead, the main father who we see, who's buddies with Mariko, small role still, but like starting to learn more about that. Like, it's a show that religion is so central to how the show is told. Of course, you have the kind of insurgency of Christianity in Japan at the time. Some of the regents are Christians, others are not. And yet it's not a show that paints with like a broad, like anti-religious brush by any means. I actually think it's like kind of quite layered in how it goes about telling those things. And the Anjin's adoption of some sort of faith towards the end of the series, I thought was quite well earned as well. I think Lady Ochiba, when she doesn't really come into the show really until like episode 5 or so, when she makes like the power play for the council, but that's a character that starts off kind of vague, but even then gets a little bit more by the end, gets a little bit more detail. Not so much character development, but just like the late breaking introduction of Toranaga's half brother who becomes the regent, Seiki. I mean, he had like the look, right? The white armor, the hairstyle, the way it was, had a villainous look, you could say, perhaps, once, things happen the way they happen. But I thought that was a really memorable character introduction for like the late half of the season. Also, Toranaga's, closest confidant, Hiromatsu. Man, another great character, I thought, who, again, clearly a supporting character, clearly in service of Toranaga, doesn't have a whole lot to necessarily do, but like there are certain moments throughout the show. And then when you have in the penultimate episode, or like episode 8, when he commits seppuku, publicly disagreeing with Toranaga, and like it's the most gutting thing, and you really believe it. And then once you learn about Toranaga's plan, like it's like kind of one of those like, oh shit moments when you're watching the show. But again, Hiromatsu as a character, I think you actually kind of grew attached to him as far as the supporting character goes, and like the actor who played him, the older guy, really memorable face, right? Also, I can't forget Lady Fuji, of course, someone who early on, we're introduced to her because her husband commits seppuku on himself and their young child. And you're like, okay, she's clearly like a mourning, now familyless person. What's up with her? But as she gets, pushed into service of the Anjin at Toranaga's behest, we learn more about her, like in concert. I think some of it's very funny early on when there's like the lost in translation stuff with the Anjin and the rotting pheasant out in the house and stuff like that. Then the very like I think tragic like miscommunication stuff that leads to the gardener getting killed. Fuji starts to really make her presence felt as a character, and like how she is interacting with Mariko and Buntaro, once Buntaro comes back from the dead, seemingly, after you thought he was dead in the very beginning of the series. And then the very end, like, talk about, like, a finale, like, subverting expectations to amazing effect. The Anjin taking Fuji out to sea to bury her dead family's ashes, spread them, and then Anjin takes the opportunity to let go of the rosary that Mariko, had when she passed. Amazing moment, right? And it's like a great full circle moment for Fuji, again, ancillary character on the show, but also really fitting for wrapping up where the Anjin story has gone. And yeah, man, like, this show just up and down knocked me out. Just kind of going through some of my notes during the episode. I took notes on every episode. There's so much to talk about. Episode 3, I love that, like, forest ambush out in the woods in Osaka. We would learn throughout the show that actually a lot of people get ambushed in the woods outside Osaka. Pretty funny, honestly. You think Buntaro makes a sacrifice, but he actually comes back. Pretty epic. It would have been cool to watch him fuck up all those samurai. Episode 4, that's where Mariko and the Anjin have that, like, convo in the bath leading to the sex. And again, I thought it was incredibly earned the way it gets there. But then you have Nakado firing the cannons on Jozen, which was like a crazy, like, visual moment, right? Seeing Jozen's, mangled body, and then saying the war. And big one for sure. Episode 5. I mean, just there's this banger scene throughout this show. Episode 5, Buntaro moves in with Mariko, Fuji, and Blackthorn, and you have the dinner scene where they just keep throwing back the sake, then the arrows going right by Mariko's face, and, like, of course, leading to the violence. And that's where we get the gardener death scene, which I thought was incredibly fucking sad, right? And, like, to think a really great way to communicate where the characters were at in terms of the difference between customs and the meaning of what life means, right? In terms of, you learn that the gardener volunteered for that duty because he got sick recently. And it's just, I think the way Shogun is able to ingratiate Blackthorn into the customs of Japan at the time, where he comes to understand why the people he's meeting think about life and duty differently than, his European sensibility has led him to believe. And again, something that builds throughout the series, but you come to understand why he's really kind of ingratiated himself into the culture and kind of come accepting of it. We get this scene in the very beginning of the finale where we see the Anjin on his, I don't know, deathbed, but he's old, on bed, and his grandchildren are there looking at his swords and his armor. So we know he escapes the Japans, as he would put it, right? And I'd love to know how, but he's, kind of holding a rosary, seemingly really adopted the faith. And it's just interesting, I'm curious how people would think about that scene, because it almost feels a tad out of place, almost like Saving Private Ryan, where Private Ryan's old ass, like, goes up to the gravestone and says that he earned it and all that stuff. Like, it maybe feels a tad out of place. It's because it's also so brief in the finale. Nonetheless, stood out. Episode 6, I love, like, the 22-year-old flashback to young Mariko as the ward. We kind of learn about her father and his plan, marrying her off to someone kind of insignificant family-wise in Buntaro, learning what that means. We learn about what the Crimson Sky plan is, of course, learning about Lady Kiku's relationship with Yabushige's nephew, and, in general, learning about the Willow World brothel and how it's more than that. It's really more of a tea house. I thought all that was actually pretty cool. Episode 7 opening up with Toranaga's first battle as a young, like, boy warlord, basically, helping his opponent commit seppuku. The introduction of Toranaga's half-brother before he realized he's bad, really memorable as well. The end of episode 7, where we hit the failed, ambush, the failed assassination of Toranaga's brother, leading to the death of Toranaga's son. Man, that was a show, like, or an episode where I was like, once I realized what was happening, it's kind of like one of those, like, pumps you up. It's like, yo, kill him, like, get it done. And then watching Nakado, like, meet his untimely demise by literally slipping on a pond rock and breaking his neck. Like, it's like, yeah, what else would have happened to that guy? Honestly, it felt earned, but it was a hyped moment. And then again, I mean, the standout, of course, that's episode 7. Episode 8, you had the funeral. can't go. We're starting to learn or be suspicious of the plan. Hiromatsu dies. He visits the funeral pyre at the very end. Then episode 9, really just those 4 scenes, right? You have publicly Mariko defy the council, say she's going to leave. Amazing scene, amazing from Sawai. Then the scene where she attempts to leave with her men, and she gets refused by Shido's men. All of her men get killed. She tries to fight her way out. She can't. Realizes she can't escape. Publicly says that she will commit seppuku at sunset because of this grievous act of defiance, which is permitting her from serving her lord. And then we go to the scene where she's going to commit seppuku, and the regent who she asks to be a second as a Christian does not come. So Blackthorn volunteers to be the second, finish it off. And you really think it's going to happen, because we know how much Mariko cares about wanting to die in a certain way, right? And what it means to her. That's been very well established at that point. So you believe it's going to happen. And it's sad, right? Is the best character on the show. You're fucking invested. And then it doesn't happen. Shido shows up last second. And I was like, wow, good fake out. But then I clicked up and I was like, oh shit, 10 minutes left in the episode. I didn't feel good. And then, of course, Yabushige has the Judas moment, and leading, of course, to Mariko's death. And it's just a standout episode. I think it's a stone cold, instant classic type episode. Speaking of Thrones, always the penultimate episode being very eventful. Certainly the case here with Shogun as well. But yeah, I feel like I've just kind of been super long-winded with this, but absolutely amazing show. I'm very curious how hard FX would push the creative team for a second season, given the rating success of it. I'm not going to expect more Shogun. I don't think it makes sense. Of course, this show ends where the adapted book ends. Also, they put so much time and planning into the development of Shogun Season 1. There is none of that started for a Season 2. It would be many years before they get Season 2 done. And, so many characters off the board. I feel like it would be a bit of diminishing returns. I feel like the leave you wanting more is a great place for the show to end, right? A little bit of ambiguity about Toranaga. Obviously, the Anjin's fate in general. How does he get back to England? We'll never know, right? But, on the other hand, it's tempting to think about what would happen, because this is obviously fictional characters, but it's right at the turn of the Tokugawa shogunate. It's a very eventful time in Japanese history, so there's certainly richness to explore, especially a show like this, which is so concerned with being historically accurate, right? Similar to how Tokyo Vice Season 2 ends in, I think, a really satisfying way from a character standpoint, but as you're approaching the 2000s and Japan is entering economic downturn time, there's meat on the bone for a story, right? You just have to come up with it. That being said, I'm not banking on more Shogun, and I think as a one and done, it's up there with the best of them. Honestly, my number one show 2024. Apologies to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which I also loved, but I'll be hard pressed to see anything top Shogun. I'm very excited for House of the Dragon. I'm very excited for The Bear Season 3, but to me, Shogun was near flawless, so I'm expecting it to probably be my best show of the year. We'll see what happens. It's only April. But let me know. What did you think about Shogun? Obviously, I had a lot of thoughts. How did you feel about it? What was your favorite moment about it? Favorite performance on the show? Let me know. Do you want to see a Season 2? And for more TV reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.